This is ESM 105. The date is September 29th. All right, and it's 2025. Recording. All right. First thing we're going to do today is take a look at the syllabus. Here we are in week 6. It's a good time to just check in on our course schedule. I made a slight change to the course schedule where I added in a week to just catch up on previous materials. Okay, week 9, we're just going to do catch up because I've got week 7 and 8 prepped. 5 and 6 we are starting today in week 6. Okay. So that just meant that I'm going to be sort of collapsing ecological economics and human populations into 1 week each. They're going to kind of be like I'm going to kind of bundle them together because I'm looking at materials that I want to cover with you. I think it works pretty well that way. Okay. Otherwise, everything's pretty much the same. The quizzes fall on the same dates. I didn't change any of that. Same quiz plan, right? Where, like quiz 3 is going to cover weeks 5 through 6 and also your current reading, which is Cradle to Cradle, right? Your third book is Cradle to Cradle. And then quiz 4 on November 2nd will cover Stuff, The Secret Life of Everyday Things, as well as the PowerPoint from weeks 7 through 8. And then we've got quiz 5, quiz 6. They will cover only lecture materials. And then the final, And the final, I've decided I'm going to do it as every student gets a random poll from previous quiz questions, okay? So the lecture quiz questions seem to be working for people pretty well. Overall performance is high. That way we can just put it up, you do it, it wraps, it grades, you know your score in the class, and you're good to go. So it'll be different for everybody, but I think it'll be kind of fun. And it's 50 points, so it's not a make or break assignment for you in this course. Questions about that? Online during your regularly scheduled exam time, okay? So no, you should have that time scheduled aside anyways. Please.
I remember at the beginning of the semester you were talking about at the end of the semester you will drop our lowest grade.
I'll drop your lowest, like a missed discussion or lowest discussion. Yeah, that's just for the discussion. Yeah, basically, okay, cool. If you miss one, I'm just gonna excuse you from it. All right, solid. No problem. And also thank you all for participating in those discussions. I read every single one, even if I don't respond to every single one, And I appreciate that everybody's engaged. It's hard to believe. Okay, anything else? Any other questions? Like I said, slight change. You probably won't even notice it. Fall break's a month away, 2 months away. It's gonna be great. All right, I'm very excited to get back into our material. We are technically in week 6. So y'all completed your quiz 2. Good job. Come on, work here, work with me. Week 6, so you click the week 6 thing. Be sure to continue working on your annotated bibliography and also read Cradle to Cradle, which is going to be covered on your 3rd quiz. Solid? I've had some people come up and talk to me about annotated bibliography assistance, whatever, and I'm totally open to that. I'm always down to talk about how to assemble an annotated bibliography. Don't be shy, just reach out. I also have office hours, I have office hours all the dang time. I have some today from 12 o'clock until 1 o'clock. Okay. So we've been talking basic ecology so far. For those of you watching the recording, I'm currently at near the end of week 3 through 4 PowerPoint, looking at slide number 53 and on. More like 54. I'm going to try to do that more to be helpful to the people watching the recordings. Okay. Ready? Here we go. A basic ecological principle that's incredibly important is succession. And I remember when I did this on Friday, where I was like, the community is changing and moving toward a stable climax community, where it no longer really changes. But in reality, what happens is the community moves towards the climax community and then gets reset by a disturbance, and then moves forward and then gets reset by the disturbance, and onward and onward. And sometimes I'm walking towards you as the climax community now. Sometimes it'll be like stuck in this little loop where it never really moves towards the climax community anymore because there's just a chronic disturbance that never lets it progress beyond that stage. Now, what are we talking about as far as stages? Okay, we're talking about these things called sears or seral stages. So ecologists, community ecologists, define these seral stages for a given community type, right, as having a certain community composition. That doesn't sound like I'm saying anything because I'm using the same words so much. But welcome to ecology, you know? So here we go. You've got the oak woodland community, and you understand how the oak woodland community undergoes succession. And different people who model the oak woodland give the different seral stages different names and different defining characteristics, such as plant has less than 20% woody plant cover, okay? Things like this. The important thing that I'm trying to get out for you right now is that these seral stages need to be defined, just like everything in ecology. You need a strict definition, even if what you're really describing is a gradual process, all right? Any distinction between these seral stages is human enforced. We say, well, the sear starts here, ends here. Next sear starts with this community composition, ends with this community composition. All right, so it's defined, but defined by humans. Yes? This right here is actually not all primary succession. So let me dial it back. I'm just getting too excited to talk about this figure because I love it so much. I'm like, I want to talk about this, but let's talk about the different types of succession. So in primary succession, you start with bare land. There are two really solid examples of primary succession that I use in my classes, and those are the volcanic eruption, as on this, right? You get an entirely new growth substrate where there's nothing alive. And then glacial retreat is another good example of primary succession, where the land used to have a glacier over it, all right? And then the glacier melts, and now this region right here is newly exposed and can undergo primary succession. Now there's always some exception, right? We could say it with the lava as well, but really with the glacial retreat, it's like, well, what if there are plant propagules here, like seeds that have been dormant for thousands of years and they emerge? Is it really primary succession then? And I say, well, not really, all right? But it's kind of hard to find true examples of primary succession. So primary succession, it's a full new substrate, all right, where plants have not grown before. Secondary succession is caused by a disturbance that sets you a little ways back but doesn't completely reset the community composition to nothing, okay? That's the idea. So primary succession is slow. It requires a drastic disturbance. Secondary succession can be pretty quick, especially because some plants specialize in persevering through disturbance, all right? Remember we talked about our CSR framework for classifying plant life cycles here, right? It was up here. Oh, no, never mind. We talk about that in week 5 through 6. Sorry, I've been jumping around all of these things, working to try to make everything flow a little better, and I'm all confused. We're going to talk about life history strategies and how some organisms exist. Well, they survive by tolerating disturbance. Don't worry, we'll get to it. Yeah.
Last week you ended about to define resilience.
Resilience, sick. Okay, cool. But did I talk about inhibition and facilitation? See, I think I was just like, let's go here. Boom, 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 like that. So let's just go ahead and knock out these last few slides. I'll make sure that I get them all, and then we'll hit resilience in just a moment. All right. So primary succession, good. Newly exposed land. The species that first colonize the land are called pioneer species, okay? And these pioneer species sort of modify the landscape usually, but they're also it could also be advantageous for them to prevent the establishment of other species if they want to continue to exploit that landscape and use all the resources there. So this leads us to sort of this concept of, why would I selflessly improve the environment through my existence, okay, as a pioneer species, so that other species can come and outcompete me? You see what I mean? And this leads us to actually two big schools of thought in community composition, which we're not going to talk about Clementsian and Gleasonian communities, but rest assured, that'll come up in the next course that you take about ecology, okay? It all ends up boiling down to some idea of how designed the communities are to interact with one another. It's fascinating, but we're not going to worry about it. We're going to talk about this. So I shouldn't have said anything. Just pretend I didn't say anything. Forget those names, okay? Okay, cool. So the pioneer species come in. Those are the first species to establish in the newly available habitat. And that's a survival strategy, right? Is I'm just gonna wait for a big disturbance to clear some resources. I'm gonna set my seeds. I'm gonna complete my life cycle. I'm gonna reproduce and spread my seeds. Then I'm just gonna sit there and wait for the next major disturbance. Huh? Okay, cool. Secondary succession, there is a disturbance that does not reset the plant community. It goes back a little ways. I think I covered this okay. How are we feeling? Climax community, okay. That's the idea of, oh, there's a stable community composition. And the community will stay there and last for a long time, and the plants can complete their whole life cycle and everything. And yeah. The reason I talk so much about plants in this ecology is because I'm a plant ecologist, for one thing, and also animals can move. Okay? So when we're talking about succession, the animal community can shift by the animals just moving. So it's a little more controlled to talk about plants for ecology. I think it's a better model system, or a better group of model organisms to use. But I'm not without my own biases here. So check this out. 3 primary mechanisms, all right? 3 primary forces of species that are interacting as we're moving through succession. So, species might be facilitating the establishment of other species. If you have a pioneer species that can fix nitrogen, or a pioneer species like a lichen that can break down stone into soil, all right, well, that is facilitating the establishment of other species. So that's one force of facilitation. During succession, some species are facilitating the establishment of other species. And the conventional line is that eventually those other species are probably going to exclude them from the environment, but you know that competitive exclusion is rare in the environment if it occurs at all. You see what I'm saying? We've talked about it. Some species, okay, species are also attempting to inhibit the establishment of other species, right? Because you don't want to give up your little patch of resources right away. So you might be carrying out something called allelopathy, where you put something poisonous into your leaves, then you drop that onto the soil, it seeps into the soil, and it helps to prevent the establishment of other species that would compete with you. All right? Allelopathy comes from the roots, meaning, I believe, it's other suffering, like alleles in the gene forms. So inhibition. Allelopathy is an extreme example of inhibition, but another one could be, I just focus on spreading out my leaves really wide and preventing any sunlight reaching through. There's also something, for example, called luxury resource consumption. And plants carry it out sometimes, where they will just use more water than they need, or use more nitrogen than they need, in an attempt to deplete the soil of those resources so that it's harder for other species to establish. So they intentionally lower the quality of the environment to inhibit the establishment of other species. Now, other species, okay, persist because of tolerance. So how do we tie all of this together into the succession idea? The species that are present at any stage in succession, they are present due to an interaction of facilitation, tolerance, and inhibition. Some species persist because they can tolerate disturbance and other species can't. Or they can tolerate inhibitory processes and other species can't. Some species persist because they're inhibiting others' establishments. Some species are there and they're facilitating the establishment of other species, or I should say, some species are present because their establishment was facilitated by another species. All right? So all of these broad categories are interacting. And like I said here, I mentioned this already, it may occur via modification of the environment. Exposed rock, lichens, mosses, grasses, herbs, shrubs, seedlings, they get bigger, they get boom, boom. Stable climax community, succession. All right, the one thing that you should know as a graduate of ESM 105 about succession is these three processes, because that's what is always focused on up through like your 300 level courses that talk about succession. How's it sound? Everybody cool? All right, well, I mean, I know you're all cool. We've established that. We got a real room full of cools here. Disturbances. What's a disturbance? All right, a disturbance destroys stuff. A disturbance limits plant productivity by removing plant biomass. That's the textbook definition for a disturbance. It's one of those things where you know what a disturbance is, but you might not have thought about, like, well, how would I define a disturbance? And that's different from a stress, okay? So there's disturbances and there's stresses. Yes?
So, removing biomass from the community.
Yeah, I said plant. I shouldn't keep saying plant.
Community cycle, like over time, or like if a bunch of plants get buried, that's certainly a disturbance. But if they just regrow through the soil.
As long as it removes biomass from the living organism, even if it falls to the ground and then the nutrients go right back into the soil, or it can re-sprout, it's still a disturbance. And then it also works with animals, where like if animals are injured or some animals are killed, if you convert living biomass to dead biomass, essentially, in the environment. And that's different from a stress where biomass production is limited because of resource availability or the conditions are too stressful. So if the plants grow less, the population of mice grows slower, etc., because it's too hot, that's a stress. Or there's not enough water, that's a stress. But if a fire comes through and it destroys living biomass and converts it into dead biomass, well, regardless of if the biomass stays within the system, it's still a disturbance. Those are the textbook, that's like the delineation between the two. Solid, good question. I loved that one. Yeah, disturbances, okay? In the common vernacular, all right, those get overlapped sometimes. So we're gonna make sure that you understand what the disturbance actually is, defined as, because that's going to make our discussions of disturbance make a lot more sense, you know? Cool. Some landscapes are adapted to disturbances, or some communities are adapted to disturbance, all right? So the community composition never really stabilizes. It's all being disturbed regularly and keeps resetting to earlier sears. Yes?
So like an oak savanna that has evolved through thousands of years with human burning, and is part of that cycle, that is not a climax community.
No, it doesn't reach the climax community. If you remove the disturbance, it may move towards the climax community. But the thing is,
That it might be like Douglas fir would overtake the oaks, for example. That
yeah.
would be a climax community, but like, what's the difference between where's the line between like, why is a disturbance not part of a community?
A disturbance, so here's the thing, right? A disturbance is part of the community. The climax community concept is kind of like not a positive thing. It was applied in ecology to everything, every plant and animal community. It was looked upon as, oh, we need to encourage this to reach its climax community because the climax community is stable and we want stability in the environment. And so that's where we get ideas like fire suppression, for example. Yeah, 100% of like, yeah, it's all about preservation and then removing the human piece from the environment as well. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And don't worry, we're going to hit that pretty hard in the week 5 through 6 PowerPoint when we talk about the IUCN that develops the red list of endangered species and the sort of things that they encourage for conservation efforts that are pretty weird. I might go so far as to say unacceptable. All right? But we'll talk about that. I won't get onto any soapboxes until, like week 8. No, never. I don't have any opinions. That's the great thing about me. I can just change to whatever, Yeah, it's the best. All right. Yeah. See? Case in point. So disturbance adapted species, right? That you're really hitting the big point here. Of if you try to remove the disturbance, then those disturbance adapted species no longer succeed in the community, but the community has naturally been adapted to the disturbances. So now it's moving towards a climax community that's maybe stable, but it could end up being just a full monoculture, not a healthy community. It doesn't have the complexity we need. So that should sort of indicate that this model here isn't really enough, okay, to fully understand ecological communities. Okay, disclimax stage. Okay, cool. Do I have the video? I removed it. So, human disturbances, we're going to talk about it. There's another term, it's called plagioclimax community, when a human-imposed disturbance causes the community to live in sort of this disclimax stage. All right, but it would be like another loop over here. It's just another way of separating the human influence from the natural influence, and it's all just about categorizing. Anyways, we are going to talk about habitat conservation in our week 7 through 8 PowerPoint, okay? And in that PowerPoint, I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about disturbances, human-caused disturbances, okay? Things like habitat fragmentation, degradation, invasive species, and climate change. Okay, we're going to talk about all those different aspects. Fragmentation is huge. It's a very, very important concept in landscape ecology. A fragmented habitat is almost always considered less healthy than an unfragmented habitat. Please.
For example, like a road gets built between like a habitat or something like that.
100%. 100%. So we've got this big old habitat, right? And then you build a road through the middle of it. Oop. Like that. And now you've just fragmented the habitat. And now you have 2 habitats. And there's all sorts of important things here. For example, the boundary effect. The edge of a forest is very different from the interior of the forest. All right? The core area. The core area is the most stable region of the forest that has the fewest number of disturbances, okay? So now the core area has been divided into 2 separate core areas. And think about this, right? There used to be, before the disturbance, less overall boundary area. It's a surface area to volume ratio question, really, if you want to model it that way. With a big old core area where there was gene flow between individuals, all right? Within that core area, maintaining genetic diversity. Now, you've made isolated populations, and it's possible that gene flow can't occur between these individuals. So you could have caused all sorts of problems. You could have caused a lot of evolution here, right? Through genetic drift, okay? Even though it wasn't due to luck, it was a random event. Not really. Humans designed this here. So we hope that we consider where we're building highways and how we fragment habitats. But yeah, so you nailed it right off the bat. I could have just said yes, but this was helpful? Sick. And we'll talk about, the border effect and core areas. In landscape ecology, that's basic landscape ecology in a nutshell for you, is like fragmentation is bad. Having too much boundary effect is bad. You want to have big core areas. And we use exactly the same principles when designing nature reserves, all right? Is it better to have a bunch of small nature reserves that are all spread out, or to take all that and have one large one? It's the same principles that come from habitat fragmentation, which all have their roots in island biogeography, a field whose probably most famous proponent was E.O. Wilson, whose book you just read. So everything connects. All right, moving forward. I love this figure. I use it in 3 of my classes, all right? Because I love it so much. Okay, resilience, our final slide. We describe resilience for different habitats. We describe resilience for different communities. You want, okay, high resilience communities because they can tolerate disturbances. The definition of the word resilience is just how well can the system maintain its fundamental structure? How well can the community maintain its structure if there's a disturbance? All right? So yeah, are there ways to quantify resilience? Yes. It's also just really good to understand as language for describing habitat types. Okay. Cool. Good. Yes. This is something we're going to talk about. I really get on a big tangent about diversity and resilience. There's this thing called the diversity stability hypothesis, which is like super outdated, but we still teach it in ecology classes. I don't know. Ecology moves slow. Ecology moves really, really slow because ecological research moves slowly. It's on the level of landscapes. We're trying to look at time scales of like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Sometimes a single research project spans multiple researchers' careers, right? Lives and deaths and all these things. So we get sometimes stuck in old thinking. Yeah?
Does the definition of resilience apply to individuals in the same verbiage?
Resilient, we're using it for landscape ecology, really, and community ecology in that case.
But a tree as a system,
If it has high resilience, yeah, it could tolerate disturbance. Yeah, I love that question because you're using that systems concept, right, and applying it to more things. So the system has high resilience. It takes like the beauty out of it entirely, kind of, by calling it a system, but only if you have an old way of thinking about the word system. The system's beautiful. The system's the circle of life. The system's the flow of energy through all these different states. It's incredible, right? And so you can talk about the system on all different scales and describe a system as having high resilience, and yes, it applies the same way. Oh, this system has high resilience, it can tolerate a disturbance. And what's a disturbance? Something that removes matter out of the flow, out of the cycles inside of it. Yeah, awesome. Hey folks, here it is, week 5 through 6. And it's only, it's week 6, so this counts, right? Cool. All right. We start with biomes. Okay. I meant to crop the copyright out of there, but that's fine. It's just an entry picture. Hey, you always do these when you're giving presentations. You have a picture at the front. I'm like, yeah, sure. This is somebody with some horses. Cool. They're like getting maple syrup or something. Who knows? All right. Biomes. What are biomes? We in this class are not going to memorize 16 biomes. We're not doing that because I had to do that back when I was a student in so many classes and I always hated it. So instead, we're going to talk about the biome concept, how we characterize terrestrial and marine biomes. If you ever need to figure out which biome you're working with, you're going to look it up. Okay? You don't need to memorize where every biome is and the combination of temperature and precipitation that makes the biome, that defines the biome. Okay? You look that up. Anyways. So what are biomes? All right? Biomes, they have areas that are sharing similar climate. Okay? They usually have similar biological communities because their climate and topographical characteristics are the same. So the biome is determined by abiotic conditions, but those abiotic conditions determine the biological communities. So we define a biome, at least a terrestrial biome, primarily based on how much rainfall does it get and what's its average temperature. And that's it. You know, sometimes you'll define a biome based on the extreme temperature. These are different models, or the temperature range throughout the year. I'll show you what I mean as we move forward. Okay, so temperature and precipitation. These are the determining factors for terrestrial biome distribution because people have set up a model for determining biome type, and they have determined that the two most important variables are temperature and precipitation. So they made a simplified equation sort of situation. You see what I'm trying to say? It all ties back to using our models to understand the complicated, all the complicated stuff. Simplify it to understand it. Cool. Aquatic systems, so marine. So we're going to talk about marine mainly biomes. They are defined a little differently, not so much by temperature and precipitation, but more by, it's pretty interesting actually, there's been a major shift in marine biome schemes, where it's influenced a lot more by how stable the stratum is at the base of the body of water, and also the depth of the body of water. Don't worry, I got stuff to talk to you about it. All right, so terrestrial biomes. Did I say terrestrial? I think I said it right. Yeah, there's no proof. There's no proof at all. All right. Terrestrial biomes, okay? Defined by climate. Are we cool with this concept? The abiotic conditions define the biome, and that's going to mean that just naturally, the biotic communities are probably pretty similar, okay? Cool. So these abiotic conditions, well, climate is determined to some extent by all of these movements of bodies, movements of air, movements of water, redistributing energy around the globe, okay? So I'm gonna make you talk with me or listen to me talk about water holding capacities in gases and adiabatic cooling and adiabatic lift, because it's essential to understand when the air is dry and when the air is wet, and when the air is warm and when the air is cold, because biomes are determined by temperature and precipitation. So you gotta know why the areas are warm or cold or wet or dry. Reasonable enough? All right, so check it out. We've got, first of all, some basic terminology. Oh, question?
I'm a little confused about the diagram. Like,
This one.
For most temperate forests, isn't it? Why is the winter isn't dry, right? Because there's snow.
So there is snow, but we're measuring precipitation as the amount of water that falls, right? So the snow persists, but is it overall a greater amount of rainfall than in the summer? Do you see what I mean? It's like if you let all the water that fell onto the soil collect there. It would look like there would be a lot more water standing after the summer than snow standing after the winter. So precipitation rates are different than how much water is held in the snow. Does that make sense? Sort of? Kind of? Okay, cool. Yes?
Precipitation in the biome is how much water is cycling.
Yeah, okay.
Like, if a bunch of snow is held in mountains,
Oh yeah.
then there's a lot of water falling from the sky, and it's frozen, but it's not going down and coming back up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's not actually moving through the system, so that's absolutely another way to think of it. Yeah. Solid. Very good. Okay, and we'll see sort of why as we talk about water holding capacities and these sorts of things. You need the heat to hold the water in the air to make the water fall out of the air at different locations. And of course, there's exceptions, and there's more to it than just this. This is not all of the air movement patterns on the globe, okay? But essentially, here's what we've got going on, okay? Around the equator, you get this low pressure system. It's low pressure because this region of the globe, bless you, these latitudes, all right, are getting blasted with a ton of solar radiation. That's increasing the temperature of the air molecules. And I did this before with you, right, where I made you talk to me about temperature and what it is, because it's so important, So you blast those molecules with more energy, and they're moving around more, so they become less dense. All right, they're moving around more. Cold air, more dense. Warm air, less dense. Cool? Low pressure area. So that hot, really jiggly air is lower density, so it goes up. All right? Lower density gases rise. Please.
Did you say that we're in like a grade, the
Ooh, oh, from this right here. What's our latitude? I think that it doesn't. Yeah, they always say we're in a Mediterranean climate. Here we go. If you want to know like the biome sections that we're sort of in, we've got them all right here.
The reason the Mediterranean is like that is because the oceanic currents bring a lot of heat up there.
Which we're going to look at right here. We've got the air movements. Yeah, there's a lot here. All right, cool. So the first level that we're going to talk about with what determines climate is how direct the solar radiation hits the planet. All right, how much solar radiation hits. We get a lot at the equator, makes the molecules move more. They reach low density, they go up. All right. Now, these will have a lot of water in them because evaporation rates are high, and the gas is warm, so it can hold a lot of water. But as it rises, it precipitates the water out. Now, it's not necessarily that each molecule is moving less, but the molecules are moving further apart, so they can't suspend water molecules as effectively. All right? We'll talk about adiabatic cooling in a moment, but it's pretty fascinating. Okay, now, as this air moves up, it must be replaced by other air that is, of a higher density. So you get these little cycles here. You get these little cycles over here that move different. Same thing, okay? You use a cycle up here. It's all cold. This is not a class to fully discuss these concepts, but I want you to understand the basic mechanisms at play. All right, so you get these cycles of warm air rising and then being replaced by cooler air usually, or at least moisture depleted air, and the cycle keeps moving forward. Okay, you get these little cells that they're called. Great. So Mediterranean climates, desert climates, temperate climates, and wet tropics. Three major sorts of categories that we should be familiar with. These Mediterranean climates, they get most of their precipitation in the winter. All right. These desert climates have low precipitation year-round. The temperate climates have abundant precipitation in the summer, usually less precipitation in the winter. The wet tropics, they have abundant precipitation and they have abundant rain. I said that twice. They have plenty of precipitation and it's usually warm year-round. They're aseasonal, so they don't really have a summer and a winter month because there's not that much variability in how much solar radiation hits the equator. It gets a pretty consistent amount year-round. Yes, you don't get growth rings on the plants there because they don't go through winter and summer cycles of producing dense wood and less dense wood. Cool. I love it. I love it. We're going to look at sort of these climate diagrams in just a minute in more detail, but these are super useful. They'll graph precipitation and temperature over the course of the year, and you'll see that each biome has a characteristic climate diagram situation going on. Okay, solid. So there's a lot of things leading to global wind patterns beyond just differences in solar radiation hitting the globe, okay? Including, so we've got solar heating, that's what I sort of talked about just now. High pressure goes up, low pressure comes in, all right? That's what they're talking, when you see in the meteorologists, they're like, oh, there's a low pressure front coming through or a high pressure front coming through. That's what they're talking about, okay? High pressure can usually hold more moisture. There's a lot of really interesting stuff about it. Coriolis effect, okay? Coriolis effect is frustrating. So there's like if the globe wasn't spinning, it could be this simple, and life would be so great, except that we'd all be dead, But it would be so simple for the students in these classes. So here's the Coriolis effect. Effectively, the globe is spinning, all right, the air currents are still moving, not connected to the globe. And so therefore, it looks as if particles get deflected opposite the axis, or the direction, not the axis, of rotation. All right, so think about this, if the floor was moving to the left, and I'm walking straight, like I know I'm walking straight. If the floor is not moving, I walk right into this, right? But if the floor is moving to the left and I'm walking straight, it looks like I'm doing this. You see, because the floor was moving. Straightforward enough example of the Coriolis effect? Cool. There's fascinating things about this too. Like this part of the Earth rotates much more rapidly than this part of the Earth, all right? Because it's like a record. If you squash it down and you look at a record, it's one surface, but the outside has to spin way more rapidly to move around compared to the inside, which is sort of like, you see what I mean? See my pinky, how fast it's moving? Anyways, it's fascinating stuff. Great, that's why they shoot off rockets out of Florida, because they're closer to the equator, so there's more centripetal force around the equator because the Earth's moving more. Yes?
Also keeps hurricanes from going across the equator.
Oh, you know what? I'd never put that together. That's really cool. Yeah, I love it. Hell yeah. Okay, let's continue moving forward. That's really, I gotta think about that. Class is canceled for the rest of the semester. All right. Pressure gradients we've kind of talked about. I want to talk to you about topography. That's the one that I really want to get into because this is super important in, for example, how much precipitation is held. So here's the thing. Wind patterns move across the planet in these more complicated ways because of the Coriolis effect. All right? They're going up, they're going down, and then they're spinning. The perceived motion of the particles of air is like in these weird directions, okay? So that's going to determine which coasts are receiving wet air from over the ocean, and which coasts are receiving dry air from over the land. And you can see it right here. I mean, look, like you can see in South America, you can see it in North America, how if you're getting that air, okay, from over the ocean, you got more moisture. If you're more inland, the moisture's already been removed from the atmosphere, okay? It's a pretty clear pattern when you see these sort of laid over one another. And part of it is this process right here, this topographic effect, okay? Which is adiabatic cooling, adiabatic lift. It's a really important process. So you've got some air, and it's got some water in it. It's got an amount of energy per unit area, okay? And as the air hits something, like a mountain range, it goes up. And as it goes up, it lowers its density. So that same box of air has fewer air molecules. Therefore, that box of air has less energy. So each air molecule had the same amount of energy as it moved up to the higher elevations, but the air molecules got further apart, okay? So there's less energy per unit area of air. This reduces the temperature per unit of air because there are fewer molecules with energy in that little box. So it's cooling, but not through a heat transfer. It's cooling just because it's becoming less dense. And that's adiabatic cooling. It's an adiabatic process. All right, question?
This is why whenever I'm at the river in Willow Creek, I drive back home over the hill and I'm just instantly just foggy.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we get the fog where we do on the hills. It's because the air is all dense. It goes up. It becomes less dense, all right? And now it can't hold the air, so the air starts to condense out, right? Absolutely. And so you can see these patterns. And understanding this process right here helps us understand distribution of plant life. And distribution of plant life is really important in determining how the community composition, all right? because it can't just move. So we've got this big mountain range here that we're lucky enough to be on the wet side of. But you go to the dry side of it, and the air has been depleted. The air has been depleted of moisture. And then to make matters worse, all right, the air now descends and it becomes more dense again. Meaning, since it didn't transfer heat out, it gets heated up again. Because now the molecules were far apart, and now they're closer together. And that means it can hold more moisture, so it can actually sap moisture out of the environment now on the leeward slope of a mountain range. So now the air is warmer, it warms up, it sinks and it warms through an adiabatic process, and the humidity decreases. It's pulled right out of the environment. So, this is the cool stuff, I think. The global patterns of air movement are always a frustrating topic, but you have to understand them to understand, like, how does it interact with topography? Where does the moist air come from? And then there's a global pattern of heat movement as well, global circulation patterns of water. But anyways, we've kind of done enough, I think, for entry, into the biome discussion, which is coming up right here on Wednesday. Thank you all so much. Look at this. Biomes defined entirely by average temperature and annual precipitation. What an oversimplified model. Am I right? And we'll talk about that next time. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Monday. Have a wonderful Monday.